Excellent, there you are. Well, welcome everybody to the Spring Speaker Series at BKC. Building on the success of the RSM Speaker Series started by the Institute for Rebooting Social Media in the fall of 2023, we bring together academics, top experts, industry professionals to talk about cutting-edge research at the edge of things like social media, AI, and so much more. My name is Jay. I use they, them pronouns, and I'm the executive assistant here at the Berkman Klein Center. Today, we're going to be tackling a pretty sticky question, which is how do we design AI systems that can aid in making decisions involving very personal human discretion? So things like legal cases, immigration contexts, and how do we do that while balancing the need for context and human agency, the discretion part of the title, with avoiding arbitrary and biased decision-making from the systems, the denoising part of the title. And doing that with us today, we're very lucky to have finale Doshi-Velez and Mason Kortz. Finale? Yes, please, applause deserved. Absolutely. Finale is a Herschel Smith Professor of Computer Science at the Harvard Paulson School of Engineering and Applied Sciences. She did her MSc at the University of Cambridge, her PhD at MIT, and her postdoc at Harvard Medical School. Today, she leads the Data to Actionable Knowledge Lab at Harvard, where they apply probabilistic methods to decision-making scenarios involving humans and AI. We're also lucky to have with us Mason Kortz, who is a longtime member of the BKC family as well. Mason is a Cyberlaw clinical instructor, and he brings with him a wealth of knowledge when it comes to things like government transparency, algorithmic decision-making, software and database development, and the legal landscape around AI. But before I pass off the session to them, I just wanted to thank you all again for being here on a totally unnecessarily cold day. We are facing, a new set of challenges in this world, and so we're going to have to really collaborate to face those challenges. But I like to think of events like this as a great opportunity to get your brain spinning, your blood pumping, and ideas rolling towards meeting those challenges. Last reminder before I pass it off that today's session is recorded, so keep that in mind for your participation, and there will be an opportunity for questions at the end. Without further ado, please join me in welcoming Mason and Finale.
All right, yeah, thanks again, everyone, for being here. So just to set the stage, we're hoping that this is a fairly interactive discussion. I'm not bringing you research findings, I'm bringing you research questions. And I hope that in this room and on Zoom, we can talk about, can we switch to the slide, please?
After you're done with your intro, because I don't want to take away the picture of you talking.
Oh, okay. All right. That we can talk about some of these questions of like how to denoise and have discretion at the same time. All right, cool deal. Okay, and before starting, so Mason and I also want to recognize my master's student, Shanze, who is there in the audience, who's done a lot of the real work behind this, and Peter Henderson at Princeton for his support on this project. All right. So most of my work to date and a lot of AI applications have decision-making settings that look maybe kind of like what you see on this slide. There's data, there's lots of data, there's too much data for you to see. For example, a patient's health records, everybody else's health records, and then there's the patient in front of you. And what you're hoping when you have, for example, a doctor trying to make a decision, one of my main application areas, is that you can take all of that data out there and condense it somehow such that you have some useful information. And then you also get some additional information from the patient because there's no ICD code for master of all four elements. That's the avatar down there. And so, you put your information together to make the best choice, to diagnose whatever's going on. So this is the sort of setting that I've been working in. And I would argue that implicitly is the sort of mindset that we've been in a lot of AI decision support, this idea of there being a right and wrong answer. And ideally, information gets put together to find those answers, right? So this implicit assumption that there's an objectively correct answer. And in many application areas, this is indeed the case. For example, what is the species of the bird in this picture? There is a species that this bird belongs to, and there's a right and wrong answer to that question. Does this patient have sepsis? right? How long will it take me to walk from home to work, right? I may not know when I start the walk, but when I finish the walk, I will know how long it took me. And there is a right and wrong answer to that prediction. If this person is given bail, will they commit a crime? Again, you might not know right now, but in some period in future, you will know that answer. And that is a right and wrong sort of thing that is measurable. So in all of these cases, we know what the correct answer is eventually. And when we ask, what is the point of having an AI involved in this process? Or what's the point of having a human involved in this process of asking a question that looks like this? Well, the reason why you probably would want an AI and human working together is because perhaps they have different information, right? The AI that is looking at the bird image is really good at picking out certain bird features, but maybe the human is good at noticing what the street sign in the background says, and that gives some additional information or context, and can put together pieces of information. Or maybe the bird's at a funny angle and the human recognizes that, oh, the lighting is off, and maybe I shouldn't trust this particular feature from the AI. So these are all situations where we're trying to get better accuracy by taking advantage of the fact that both the human and the AI have different pieces of information. So these are in settings where there's a correct answer. But not all settings look like the sort of setting where there is a measurably correct answer. Was this accident due to negligence, right? That's a value type of question, right? Of like, what do we define as negligence? Was the person trying hard enough to prevent the accident or not, right? Should this person be given bail, right? That's different than if given bail, will they commit a crime, right? That's a value-based question. Should we bomb this target, right? When I talk to people who are more on the defense side of things, that again is a value-based question. Should a patient have the surgery? Again, that's a different question than does this patient have sepsis? Do these cells are these cells cancerous? Those are right and wrong questions. Whereas should the patient have a surgery, that's not a right and wrong question. That's a question that depends on the patient's values. Right? So I want to make a clear distinction between things that are measurable and have right and wrong answers and situations where there are not right and wrong answers in that sense, or the correct behavior depends on your values. And in that case, there's I would argue, a different key reason why you would want humans in the loop. We need humans in the loop because we are the source of the values, right? We are the source of the discretion about, like, did they try hard enough, for example. We may also believe that it's really important to maintain human agency and connection to the outcome, right? If a machine is the source of the recommendation for the surgery, for example, the surgery doesn't go well, we might say, it really should have been like the doctor's decision or something like this. Or if you're thinking about military targets, do you want to hand off your weapons to an automated system and somehow absolve yourself of that moral responsibility that goes with pushing a button, right? So there are reasons to keep humans in the loop because we are the source of the values, and we kind of believe that kind of in one way or another, like our morals, our ethics should come back to us, right? In terms of how we behave. So these are normative contexts. So a natural question is, well, if we need the humans for this really important part of a normative context, well, what are the AI supposed to do, right? And so the thinking that I've been having along these lines is that even when decisions depend on values, we often still have a notion of correct or incorrect process, right? So not an incorrect or correct outcome like the bird species classification, but an incorrect or correct process. That if you're considering having a surgery, for example, hopefully the doctor asks you some questions about, what are you hoping to do post-surgery? Can you make it to certain types of rehab? What is your risk trade-off, right? Like, are you able to do some other medicated solution instead, and that's going to cause these side effects? Have you thought through that? So there is still a notion of a good process, even if the answer doesn't necessarily have like an objective, like thumbs up, thumbs down, correct, incorrect notion. And importantly, the process allows us to denoise, is what I would argue. That rather than acting on a whim, rather than acting on just like your gut feeling in this moment, having a process, having a list of criteria to consider helps you be aligned, perhaps with yourself in the context of the surgery, in the context of, is this negligence, ideally with some sort of societal notion of what negligence is, because we wouldn't want every single case being decided based off of just feelings in that moment. We want some consistency in that definition, while still allowing for discretion, because if you follow all the steps, maybe different people could follow those steps and reach different conclusions, right? And that would still be a correct process. So this is kind of my thesis, is that correctness, there is still a notion of correctness in normative context. It just is in the place of process, not in the place of outcome. So when we think about AI, well, AIs could be useful for computing first of all, any objective elements, right? So if you need to estimate the surgery recovery time, right, the AI could help you do that, because that's an objective thing, and maybe that's an objective fact that's useful for you in part of your process. But it could also be useful to make sure that you don't miss key facts, or maybe that you don't get hung up on extraneous facts that maybe have nothing to do with whether something's considered negligence or not. And also that you don't miss any elements of the process, right? If the process says, make sure that you consider both the cost and the risk of the outcome, then, and you're only talking about cost, maybe the process, the AI helps remind you that, hey, you should also be thinking about certain risks as well. How to do this, though, is an open question, because AIs tend to manipulate us, right? When we have them in front of us, or they go in the other direction. So there's a very large literature on this. I'm just giving a couple of examples. Hopefully this is not surprising. But in the context of law and policy, in example of denoising but not discretion, in 2017, ICE changed their algorithm to basically remove the release option, and adherence rates to the algorithm stayed the same before and after the software change, unannounced software change. And the number of release rates went down kind of consistently with this, people were just following the algorithm, right? So this is an idea, this is an example. Denoising, yes, people were acting consistently. Discretion, maybe no, right? Because the same person before and after algorithm could have gotten very different results, even in terms of what was happening. Yeah.
Maybe I can talk about the bail one.
Yeah, go ahead.
Yeah, so there was a recent study also collecting studies around the country, but focusing on 2 jurisdictions that introduced mandatory use of algorithmic risk assessments in determining whether people got bail. And what they found was that it actually had very little impact on the rate at which people got bail, or the rate, the actual bail that was set, where judges had discretion to set different amounts of money. And if you break it down further by judge, what they found is judges tended to cite the algorithmic risk assessment as a factor when it agreed with their existing predisposition, and overrule it when it didn't agree. And actually, if you look, the judges in that particular jurisdiction were all over the spectrum. You had some judges, oh, sorry, do you have a tech issue or?
No, I have a question.
Oh, okay. Yeah. So they found that there are some judges who ordered people detained pre-trial only 5 or 6% of the time, and others that were northward of 70%. And on the individual judge level, it had almost no effect. So this is an example where the judges, probably used to having a lot of discretion, just preserved that discretion, but the risk assessment served no identifiable, valuable denoising, right? In the sense that it just confirmed people's existing practices and biases.
Okay, so we had a question come in. Humans have developed techniques to ensure a process is comprehensive and being followed correctly. For example, checklists. How do AIs improve on these techniques?
It's a great question. So that we will be getting to exactly that in just a few moments. The idea is that the AI will help the human through the checklist.
Can you just go over a little bit about the definition in your context? What is denoising? Just kind of explain that again.
Yeah. So like I think maybe this bail context is like a good example. Like if people are coming in and the same person goes to like, or you can imagine if the same person was in front of 10 different judges, and each judge kind of did what they felt like, right? Or they used different criteria to determine whether this person should be released or not. Some of that variation you might think is okay because maybe they just had slightly different value judgments. But if it's for example, we say that race should not be a factor, right, or gender should not be a factor, then or the allowable factors maybe are how likely you think that this person will commit a violent crime. Then like how annoying they are maybe is also not a factor, right? And so if different judges are using different factors, then you might say as an institution, actually, we want you to consider these factors and not these other factors. And that's what we mean by denoising, that if people are kind of reacting based off like, I don't like your sweater, then that's not okay, right? We don't want that kind of variation.
Yeah, maybe I can give a concrete example that's a counterpoint to the bail study, which is the federal sentencing guidelines that were introduced in the 90s for federal court, which before that judges essentially had very broad discretion. As long as the sentence was within the range prescribed by the statutory violation, they could do whatever they wanted. The federal sentencing guidelines required judges to essentially sit down and work through a checklist or worksheet where they would identify specific, each crime had like a point value it started out with, and then that could go up or down based on you added 3 points if they used a minor in the crime. You added 2 points if they used a firearm. You took away points if they were coerced, by another person involved in the crime. And that process of making judges write down their reasoning and how much each one affected the sentence did have a denoising effect, in the sense that when judges were forced to write down what they were taking into consideration, the variation in sentences for similarly situated defendants reduced. It didn't disappear, but it reduced, suggesting that there were noisy variables that judges were consciously or unconsciously taking into account before the guidelines.
And then just more broadly, I think these two examples kind of set the stage in opposite directions, but it's a lot of work, some in our lab, some in our broader human-driven AI community and beyond, have found that people tend to fall into one of these camps, right? They tend to be like, there's a machine, I don't have to think anymore. Or I don't need no stinking machine, and they just do it on themselves, right? And so there's really a tension between how to get kind of both of these together. All right. And there has been some work in like assisted denoising, but the most effective way to denoise apparently, or in that work, was to just give people recommendations, but then they're not really using their discretion, right? So you're getting denoising effects, but you're not necessarily getting discretion as well. All right. So what we're going to do for the rest of the time that we have is play with a couple of cases and a couple of different types of AI, like what you could imagine like an AI providing as support, and make it into like an interactive discussion about like what seems to be working and what doesn't seem to be working. And we're going to go ahead. Yeah.
Oh, sorry. I was gonna, before we go into the hypo, I was gonna give a quick overview of the elements of negligence.
Okay, yeah, absolutely. So yeah, maybe I can pass it off to you. We decided to choose workplace type negligence because it's really boring in our very complicated times. Hopefully something that we can just like wrap our heads around rationally and try to be, making these decisions.
Yeah, the use case we're looking at today is negligence claims. So for those of you who have not been through 1L law school, negligence has 4 factors. First one is, did the defendant owe a duty of care to the plaintiff? Like, so was there some relationship where the defendant was required to exercise some level of care? Second is, did they breach that duty of care? Which means, did they act unreasonably given that duty of care? Third one is, did the breach cause the injury that the plaintiff is complaining of? And the fourth one is, did the injury actually occur? just to kind of like explain why this is a good candidate for discretion and denoising. So on the discretion side, there are a lot of questions in a court of law that are essentially reserved for a jury, right? So whether a particular witness is credible is reserved for the jury, right? That's not a question of law. And likewise, whether a particular action or inaction on the part of a defendant is unreasonable is largely reserved for the jury. Now, there might be a few examples where a judge overrules a jury because of a misunderstanding in law, but typically the idea, were they reasonable, is a great example of something that a jury would be asked to decide. And I just want to point out that the word reasonable does a ton of lifting in basically the entire US legal system. Almost any area of US law, eventually you will get down to a question of, was this reasonable? What would a reasonable person have done? What's the most reasonable interpretation of this statute or this contract? And so those kind of questions of reasonable are questions that are value-driven and human-driven. At the same time, my personal experience has been that juries can also make very noisy decisions. So I was actually on a jury one time in a personal injury case. The plaintiff was in a car accident. The person who hit her was driving on official business for a company. She sued the company for cost of her medical care. So we went through the 4 steps. We found that, there was a duty of care. There's a general duty of care when you're driving. We found that the driver was unreasonable. It was heavy traffic and they were going too fast for the conditions. We found causation. We found that there was a clear link in time between the crash and the injury she was complaining of. And we found that the injuries were corroborated by reliable, credible medical records. So then we were assessing damages. And this is where it got interesting because a lot of the jurors started nitpicking the damages. And one of the things they said is like, oh, well, she went to the chiropractors here and they charged $25 to put a hot water bottle on her back. Oh, they charged $10 to give her aspirin. And they're like, well, that's unreasonable. We think that's too much, so we're going to strike those damages. That question was not before the jury, right? The jury has no authority to determine whether the chiropractor's fees are reasonable. All we could determine was, did she incur those fees as a proximate result of the driver's negligence? And the answer to that was yes, we were supposed to stop there, but the jury didn't want to, right? Because that was a values-based judgment about what chiropractor should be charging that had nothing to do with the plaintiff. So this was before I was in law school, but now that I'm a lawyer, if I was sitting in that room, I would have stepped up and I would have said, okay, let's talk about what the jury should decide and what the jury shouldn't. I would have tried to denoise that while leaving discretion for the other elements. Alas, I was just a humble computer programmer at the time and I didn't know any better. But that's, I think, why this context of negligence is a great example where we have to preserve discretion as a matter of the rules of law. But also we know as a fact that there is noise that can be prejudicial to one of the parties to the decision.
Yeah, exactly. So we're going to first start with a really small example as a warm up. Right. So, and the other thing, right. So we're going to have to keep in mind is that as we're building out these tools, even though it seems like AIs are going up like this, and in some axes they are in terms of capability, just a moment. Yep. They may be imperfect. And so whatever AI support we give, it has to keep that in mind.
I think that's a good moment to ask a question from the chat
Yes.
before we jump into the scenario, which is how can we ensure that AI systems providing normative recommendations do not unintentionally reinforce existing societal biases under the guise of denoising?
I think that's a great question. And I think if you give us a few moments to go through the scenarios. So what we're going to be proposing is not necessarily, when we say AI, people often jump to providing a recommendation, which could be quite biased. But maybe there's other ways of providing support, right? Like figuring out which facts are relevant and which facts are not relevant to a particular case. So that's where I'd love for us to be thinking broadly, right? Like if you had a machine to help you, what would that machine look like, right? What would you want it to do without any sort of preconceived notions about an AI, right? But just what would your wish look like in this sort of circumstance? All right, so here's a scenario. Is it possible to move the little piece up there so everyone, well, maybe it's fine. Okay, it's not a huge deal, actually. While maybe we can leave it as is because the other text, it's probably no better place. All right. Whilst shopping at Fresh Mart, so this is a case of John and the Juice. It sounds like a band, but it's not, I guess. Right. While shopping at Fresh Mart, John slipped on a puddle of juice and he sprained his wrist, which is very sad. John claims that the incident was caused by Fresh Mart's failure to maintain a clean store. Camera footage confirms that an employee saw the spill 3 minutes and 12 seconds before John slipped. There were no placards warning of the spill. This injury will inhibit John's ability to work at his typing-focused job and thus his ability to support his family. Fresh Mart, on the other hand, says that the employee testifies that they had gone to get a mop and were on their way back when the incident occurred. The camera footage also shows that John was in the store with a highly active 3-year-old, and he was trying to catch up with her when he slipped. Okay, so this is a case. Maybe can we just get a really quick show of hands of like who thinks this is like negligence on Fresh Mart's part? Like, actually, maybe we should pause. Actually,
yeah,
do you want to provide some context?
Let me provide a little bit of context here. We're also going to say that Fresh Mart has conceded that they had a duty of care here. So there's a law in just this jurisdiction that says a store has a general duty of care to provide a safe environment to its customers. Don't worry about duty. And we're also going to say that it conceded that this injury is real and it actually did cause a financial harm. The only questions here are, was Fresh Mart negligent? That is, did they act unreasonably in cleaning up the spill? And 2, was the spill actually the cause of the injury? So with those 2 things in mind, and you have to take a position on this. You're on the jury. You have to vote one way or the other. Raise your hand if you think John has established that Fresh Mart was negligence and the negligence caused the injury. Only 3 people. So everyone else in the room, 4 people. So everyone else in the room, huh? Good question. So everyone else in the room thinks that facts are not in the record. You have to decide based on this. So everyone else in the room is going on the record saying that Fresh Mart was not negligent. They got off the hook here, is that correct?
Not enough information.
Not enough information. Okay, yeah.
How does AI deal with the gray area? It's great.
Well, what AI could do here is maybe point out, for example, which facts are relevant to which question of law. There's also certain decisions here that I would argue AI under the law could not make a recommendation on. But okay, so it sounds like most of you think that Fresh Mart was not liable here. Let's talk about. You haven't decided yet. Whoa, what do you mean? I give you like 5 seconds to deliberate. Okay, so yes, this is a hypothetical, but if this was the just for the purpose of the thought experiment, right? You have to decide on this issue, right? No more information will be provided. Who thinks Fresh Mart was negligent? Okay, now a few more people. Okay, so we're like 50-50. All right, so let me provide a little more information. The fact that John was at the store with a highly active 3-year-old, as a matter of law, that might go to contributory negligence, whether John was partially responsible for his own injury, but it actually would not affect reasonableness, right? Reasonableness solely focuses on what Fresh Mart did or did not do, right? So take out consideration of the 3-year-old. To what extent does that change? Does that change anyone's opinion on reasonableness? If we're solely talking about what Fresh Mart did, that you're not considering the fact that he was chasing after his 3-year-old.
My main question would be, is 3 minutes enough time for somebody to go and take an action? That's what I would like to know. Was that a reasonable amount of time for somebody to go and resolve?
That's what the jury has to decide.
But I would like to see the data.
Right, yeah.
It wasn't like 3 minutes is not enough time to get
Sure, in a trial, there would be a map of the store, and there would be competing testimony about how long it takes to walk to the storage closet. There would be testimony about whether the placards were in the same closet, like could they have gotten a placard in place more quickly than getting the mop, or was it most efficient to just go get the mop directly? Yes, this is a thought experiment, not an actual case. But I do want to know, does knowing that that John chasing after his 3-year-old does not impact the analysis of whether Freshmart acted reasonably, does that change anyone's opinion? So the fact that John was chasing after his 3-year-old, that fact is not, as a matter of law, is not relevant to whether Freshmart acted reasonably. Did anyone take the 3-year-old fact into account when deciding reasonableness? Okay, so some people did. So if I told you, actually, that might be relevant to damages, but it's not relevant to reasonableness, would that change your analysis? Still thinking, right.
It doesn't change my vote.
Your disposition, right, yeah.
I see you nodding yes. Do you want to share it? Like, yeah.
Oh,
Doing
right
it.
here.
Yeah.
Okay, so imagining him, John, running, like I was imagining him running after a 3-year-old, and I'm like, well, if he was running, then like that could be an issue. But as you guys stated, it shouldn't matter if you're running. When you're running, you don't expect there to be like a slippery surface, so that changed it.
Right. So the reason for going through this thought experiment is to say that, what I tried to do there, and succeeded for at least one person, is do a little denoising. And not by changing the facts, but by pointing out, under the legal structure we're operating under, this fact is relevant to injury and damages, but is not relevant to the question of reasonableness. And that's kind of what we're proposing that a more programmatic system might be able to do. Not to make determinations about facts, not to, or at least in this limited context, not to make determinations about facts, not to make determinations maybe about ultimate responsibility, but to help people learn or remember where those facts fit into the procedural system. Because yeah, a person, like a lay person sitting at this may be like, oh yeah, well, I've been in a store with a 3-year-old and that's utter chaos. I can't possibly fault Freshmart here. But the proper place to take that into account is in reducing John's damages, not letting Freshmart off the hook. And while that may seem it might seem like a distinction without a difference, in the end rule, in a very complicated case where we have more than a handful of facts on the table, that misplacement of a fact under the wrong prong of the legal analysis could hugely benefit or prejudice one party or the other.
So, remind me again, in this case, what you're describing as reasonable. What is reasonable and what is not reasonable in this example?
So the point is that that is the part that's discretion, right? So in this case, there's an example of potential noise and there's an example of discretion. So in this case, the fact that he was chasing after the 3-year-old, that is noise, right? That's a distractor that we put purposefully in there to see, like, maybe some people take it into account when they shouldn't. This question of was 3 minutes enough? That is a discretion problem of like, how fast should this person have been booking it to get the mop? If they were walking at a reasonable speed, if someone stopped them along the way and asked them, where's the ketchup? And they answered that question, like all of this sort of thing, like it would go into your discretion question of like, were they working reasonably, in terms of trying to clean up the spill that they had noticed.
And I'll point another area that's kind of reserved for discretion here is the employee testifies that they went to get a mop, right? You might not, if you were sitting in a jury, you actually sat through hours of testimony, you might think the employee's lying, right? That maybe the employee actually did take a detour or wasn't even going to bother. Credibility of a witness is, again, a type of thing that is reserved for the jury to decide in discretion. So this is an example of a system where there are some things that are like we're legally required as a matter of due process to preserve certain pieces of discretion, but there also is the risk of noise, right? And so we can't just completely favor denoising or completely favor discretion.
Yeah. Okay, so I want to make sure we have some of that interactive part. So we're going to do one now a slightly more complicated case where people will get a chance to do some thinking. with and without some type of assistance. We'll see how that goes. All right, so these were the questions for the previous case, but now we have Penny and the pallet stacker, a less good band name and a more complicated case. So I'm going to read the case, and then we're going to do a little interactive exercise. All right, so Penny was using the pallet stacker to move a heavy load when a light drizzle turned into a downpour. The stacker jerked wildly, Penny fell and suffered a serious back injury. Penny claims that the incident was caused, so she works at Metro, this warehouse distribution company. Penny claims that the incident was caused by Metro's failure to maintain the stacker. She states she reported minor issues with the stacker's stability a month before the incident, and no action was taken. Historical records report slippage-related, but not stability-related issues with stackers in poor weather. A doctor's report confirms that the fall resulted in her injuries, and the injuries will prevent her from supporting her aging parents. All right. In response, this is what Metro says. Metro Distribution points to their near-perfect workplace safety record and their recent recognition as one of the best places to work in the region due to their very high employee satisfaction ratings. Penny, they claim, has always been complaining, whether about the food at company retreats or the color of company hats. The stacker passed all routine safety checks when inspected 2 weeks ago. The machine is only 10 months old. Deep inspections, including stability checks, were completed at purchase and are to be completed annually thereafter. An internal email shows that they received Penny's complaint and claims they found the stacker functional. They argue that the unexpected weather conditions caused this unfortunate incident. So this is these are the facts in front of you. And now what we're going to do, just as a fun interactive exercise, is that everyone on this side of the room, this is like, really kludgy, but if you could put your head down or cover your eyes or in some way not look at the screen, you'll get your turn, it's okay. And then people on Zoom, you can choose whether you want to see case one, option 1 or option 2. And if you want to see option 1, stay watching your screen. And if you want to see option 2, then don't watch this one, and then and we'll switch over. So if everyone on this side of the room can cover their face somehow, don't look at the screen. Make it roughly even, please, guys. Work with us. This is really,
You're sitting on the left-hand table.
Yeah,
exactly. You have to cover your eyes for a moment.
So here, case 1, here is your supporting AI evidence for you to take into into consideration when you are coming to your decision.
You can't read it out loud because
yes, please don't read it out loud. But I will. I'll let you look at that for just a couple of moments. And then I'm guessing everyone has had a chance to look at this. Now, if everyone who's got their eyes open can now close your eyes. We're playing this grand game of Mafia or something like this. Okay, everyone close your eyes on this side. On the other side of the room, open your eyes. Here is the information that the AI is providing you in terms of the key questions that you are there to consider. We'll leave it up for just a few moments. Even if you have your eyes closed, obviously you can still be thinking about whether Metro was negligent in this particular case. We'll just leave it there for just a couple more moments. And then, all right, I'm going to go back and everyone can open your eyes. Okay, so I'm just curious, first of all, just people's opinions on the first question. Did Metro fail their duty of care? Where are people leaning?
In Metro, yeah, and again, the question is, given the circumstances, were Metro's actions unreasonable?
Unreasonable, yeah, were they unreasonable? So 1, 2, couple of people say unreasonable. Okay, what about the causation? Did the alleged failure cause the harm? Okay. So folks on this side are saying yes. Folks on this side are saying no, right? Can we have like folks on this side, can you tell us why this is the alleged failure did not cause the harm? Or anyone wants to provide rationale?
The rain caused the harm.
The rain caused the harm. Okay.
So I don't think that Metro failed their duty of care, and if they didn't, then there wasn't a failure to cause the harm.
Okay.
But the fact that they did inspect the machine and it passed inspection was important to me. So
Okay.
seemed to lead to they did their due diligence.
Got it. Yep. Yeah.
So we also have up here, simple statement, the rain caused the harm. Right.
Why do you think the rain caused the harm?
I thought I just had to give it a yes or no answer.
Okay.
Juries don't
Sorry.
have to explain themselves. So there you go.
Sure.
Actually,
Yeah.
I'm on the team left. But So for me, I was debating, and there's this gray area again, but the last sentence for me, and when we were reading, was in the past, the rain did not cause issues to the stability. So when I saw that, I'm like, it's still
It's okay.
gray area to me, but in the past, the rain wasn't the culprit.
Yeah. Yeah,
Maybe now it's
exactly.
time to show everyone the two treatments.
Yes, exactly. Right. So here was the kind of the way we usually conceptualize AI, and here the AI gives you adjudication, and it tells you there was no failure in the duty of care because all required inspections were completed, including a check after the complaint specifically was filed. Did the alleged failure cause the harm? No. The rain caused the harm, except AIs are noisy and they're not always correct. And as you pointed out, there was like an important fact here that historical records support that there's, when it's rainy, things slip around, but they don't have necessarily stability related issues. So here was case 2, or like support version 2. That just
people on the left side of the room
the
saw.
people on the left side of the room saw, in terms of using something like an AI to aggregate the information so that you can now make your choices appropriately. So did Metro fail a duty of care? You could say that there was a thorough inspection, there was a stability issue, the email claims, again, claims, right? This is a credibility question, that you will have to use your discretion, that the machine was checked and the stacker was functional, that routine checks were passed. There's nothing in here about company hats or the quality of the food at company retreats, because all that stuff was irrelevant, right? Or the employee satisfaction ratings at the company, right? Did the alleged failure cause the harm? It says a stability issue caused the fall, and the fall resulted in the injuries. It was unexpectedly rainy, but the rain has not caused stability issues in the past. So if you had all these facts together, then maybe you would get, again, a denoising of like, okay, this denoising up here, maybe about, okay, this is annoying. Maybe this is an annoying employee, but that's not relevant to this particular case. Denoising over here, where you're not, caught up in distractors of various kinds, right?
And I want to point out something important when you think about this in the context of an actual trial. So if you can go back to the facts slide, you would kind of hear the facts mostly in this order, in that the plaintiff would put on their case first and really hammer this, right? Including probably the fact that historical records report slippage related but not stability related issues. But then you're going to hear days of testimony by the defense's witness, and yeah, they'll be cross-examined. And so the plaintiff's counsel will have opportunities to revisit their case, and there will be closing arguments. But one of the things that can happen here is issues of, say, like recency bias, right? When you look at the treatment 2 slide that we gave, that changes that. And now what you pointed out is the last sentence has this as rain has not caused stability issues in the past. So something as simple as putting the facts together by which prong of negligence they fall under, rather than grouping them by plaintiff and defendant, might have an impact on how the jury decides. And I don't think, I think what we can say is it does seem like more people who saw treatment 2 we're likely to find that there was causation here. Where, although it does seem like the room was roughly equal on both sides regarding failure of reasonable care.
Which is exactly how it should happen, right? Because the failure part is a discretion question, right? Like, do you trust, you know, the amount of checking that the company did? That's not the AI answers your question about this particular thing. You go for it, yeah.
So I'm just thinking about prompts. What would be the correct prompt to get the denoising?
I see. Yes. Yeah. So I think actually I want to leave that as an engineering question. This is my problem, not your problem. In the sense that I got to build the system that will pull out this information accurately. But because we have about 6 minutes left, what I wanted people to do actually is invite people to think. Maybe you can even chat. You know, maybe take a minute or two to like chat with your neighbor. To think about, like, okay, we gave you two options here, right? Option one and option two. But if you were thinking about a case like this, and again, you don't want people caught up in extraneous information, but you also want to make sure that people don't lose their discretion, right? Like there was a problem, sorry. This one was problematic because it was wrong, right? This one was problematic because it nudged you in one direction when it really should have been kind of your choice, right? As to whether you have to kind of think about, do you trust the company checking about the stability on the stacker when the issue was brought up? Or do you think that they probably just waved it aside because, you know, the stacker had been checked 10 months ago, this employee is a whiny employee, you know, did they really do it? And that would have been a question for you to think about, right? In terms of your discretion, like, does it seem like they did their job? So this is also problematic because if everyone went to no seeing this, then it would take away your discretion or your agency on what is reasonable. Yeah. So maybe just should we let people talk for like 2 minutes?
Yeah. And then maybe I'll make one more comment at the end.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah. So maybe, you know, chat with your neighbor for like 2 minutes, and then we'd love to hear people's kind of thoughts and questions.
Yeah. We've got 3 minutes left. Yeah. All right, so what we would really like to encourage people to do is take these conversations that you have just started. It's on, is it not coming through?
You're on, yeah.
On? Okay.
All right, folks.
All right, let's come back together.
Thank you.
Attention
right.
to the front, please.
Yes. All right. We would love to continue these discussions. I'm happy to actually hang for a bit afterwards, but we're just really curious, for people who do have to leave at 1:30. Yeah, what are the sorts of ideas or thoughts that came out of your discussions or questions? Yeah, go for it.
Yeah, I think we sort of agree that we definitely would prefer the second approach because the first one, yeah, the answer might be wrong or it might be incomplete. But even if it wasn't, it's still gonna bias you in one way before you get into your own conclusion. And then in the second one, you have like the facts, the keys, the things that are important, and then you can get to your own conclusion based on your values.
I was just worried about Campbell's law that if you quantify social indicators, you expose yourself to more corruption, and going down this path seems like in future Elon's hands, what your moves made under the noise of under the guise of denoising would actually open room for a lot of corruption of discretion that should be kept in human hands. But I really appreciate the venture. I think it's worth asking, but it worries me as well.
Yeah. I mean, are you concerned about process in general? I mean, you're right that, there's process that has been used to create more even sentencing, for example, and we might argue that that's a good thing. There's process that has been used to increase the number of detentions, which you may be, okay, I'm not going to make assumptions of where people are on a political spectrum, but you might feel differently, right? Like, it seems like process is important in any organization in one form or another. So are you concerned about people just mucking with process to match their values, or kind of how like a machine might assisting with process like exacerbates that issue?
Yeah, historically having a machine there avails.
Sure. Yeah. Fair. Yeah.
We can take our final question online. Is that okay?
Oh, okay, sure.
Hi, yeah. So someone asked, something I wonder about a lot is the benefit of inefficiency and noise. Think about this in the context of AI systems and contributing to hiring decisions or loan approvals or even identifying fraud on banks under the assumption that we will always get some judgments wrong. Isn't it better to have noise in the system to protect people through diversity of outcomes?
Yeah, that's a great question, and it kind of goes to what I wanted to close with here, which is the legal system. I think is a great example where we already have a lot of procedural safeguards, and there already are a lot of attempts to distinguish between noise and discretion. Like the rules of evidence, right? What you can even put in front of a jury are premised on the idea that certain types of evidence are unreliable or are likely to trigger unconscious biases more than they're likely to contribute to actually finding out the truth. And the enforcer of the rules of evidence is supposed to be the judge, who is not supposed to favor either party. Similarly, the judge is supposed to write jury instructions that tell the jury, these are the things you're supposed to decide and these are the things that you're not. The fact is, we know from study after study that jurors and other actors in the legal system, like prosecutors, step outside that permissible realm of discretion into things that they are not supposed to be considering, right? I mean, the biggest example is that attorneys are given, in a typical case, 3 peremptory strikes where they can remove any juror for any reason. But study after study has been shown that people remove jurors who have a different race than the party they're supporting, right? On the assumption that if you're defending a white person, you want white jurors. If you're defending a black person, you want black jurors, et cetera. And that is an example where noise, in the form of people's conscious and unconscious biases, is really prejudicial to people, right? I mean, people literally go to death row or not based on these unconscious biases. And there's enormous amounts of data bearing out that is actually something that happens. So there is a really, but I also want to understand, respect this idea that some noise is beneficial, and also some attempts at denoising impinge impermissibly on discretion. And so this is why I think the legal system is a great test case for this, because we do have some areas where we know you can't take this discretion away from people. So if someone wants to take into account the fact that Penny is a complainer, and because of that, they find Penny's testimony unconvincing, they are allowed to do that, right? And I would take the stance that a system should not be telling someone that is entirely irrelevant. Now, on the other hand, if someone wants to say, as a matter of law, John's own conduct in the store is relevant to damages, but not to whether the store was acting responsibly, I think that's something that would actually help, right? Because jurors intentionally or unintentionally move facts around, consider them in the wrong context, and it does have prejudicial outcomes. Now, here we're talking about injury, which, financial compensation for a workplace injury is no small matter. But, like this also is something where we're constantly looking at the delta between what could be in terms of denoising and while preserving discretion and existing systems, right? We're not comparing this to a perfect world where jurors always know the exact line between discretion and noise. We're comparing it to an existing system that is full of violations going in both directions: too much discretion, too little discretion, impermissibly using discretion or infringing on discretion. I agree that putting this in the hands of a machine does in some ways provide more cover, especially if that machine is just trained on past decisions. You're just essentially putting a seal of approval on past human bias. But at the same time, I also think that we have to recognize that the human mind is a black box as well and is capable of adding a lot of impermissible and ultimately extremely harmful noise to systems.
And on that beautiful note, I think we're going to take the opportunity here to close out our session. Can I get a big round of applause for Finale and Mason? And Finale has already mentioned that she's willing to stick around for a couple minutes to answer a few questions, and also step outside to have those conversations if you wouldn't mind, so we can get the space cleaned up. And I wanted to plug our speaker session for next week. We're going to be having Peter Wang from Anaconda AI visiting us. He is the Chief Innovation and AI Officer for Anaconda, and he's going to be talking about, in the age of intellectual property disputes around AI, what could a potential global system look like? A global open AI commons is the idea. So he's going to pitch his idea to you next week, so make sure you show up. And thank you again for coming.